Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today, we're going to be looking at the Amazon skill that I used pretty much for all of Ladder Season 2, called Freezing Arrow. Freezing Arrow is a rather amazing ability and a very nice density clearing ability, although it doesn't really have very good single target damage. It does have two prerequisites, which is Cold Arrow and Ice Arrow, and unfortunately both of these are actually quite poor in terms of damage output. Cold Arrow is actually very poor if you're an actual Freezing Arrows on, and the reason is because it's a physical damage skill. I know it says Cold Arrow, but Cold Arrow is not actually a real elemental damage ability. It's a conversion ability, which means it takes your physical damage and converts it into elemental damage. And generally, as a cold zone, you tend to have relatively no physical damage, so the conversion is poor at best. Ice Arrow, while it does have halfway decent damage at 3,204, it's nowhere near as good as the 3,727 that is on Freezing Arrow. The only reason why you would ever fire Ice Arrow is because of the extremely long freeze duration of 19.2 seconds. Other than that, it really doesn't have much purpose in the Freezing Arrows on's repertoire. Honestly, when it comes to the Freezing Arrows on, the only skill that you really need to worry about is Freezing Arrow itself. Now, Freezing Arrow is a pretty amazing ability because it has a radial explosion of 3.3 yards. Now, this radial explosion happens every single time the arrow hits a target, and because of the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful piercing effect of obviously the pierce ability and other piercing effects like Razor Tail, Wisdom, maybe even piercing on a bow, the additional pierces allow the explosion to happen multiple times, up to 6 times, in fact. So 5 pierces and 1 additional explosion at the end when it finally finishes its run. So to show you that really quickly, I have to actually catch the explosion. So what I need to do is fire an explosion, and we need to chase it. And I'm going to show you that it actually explodes an additional time past the normal 5. So when you fire the shot, you've got to chase it, and you'll notice that at the end of its life, it does an additional explosion. That is the 6th explosion. This is something that I only recently discovered as I was playing this on, which means that you can have a total of 5 pierces, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then at the end of the shot, it will explode 1 more additional time, which is a total of 6. Now, it is a little bit difficult to use that 6th explosion because, as you can see, it does happen pretty far off the screen. If we were to stand directly on the waypoint and fire our shot, you will notice that it happens about right in front of Hadriel, which is a very specific place. So you've got to time your arrows off screen, essentially, to take advantage of that 6th explosion. And it's a little difficult. Although you will get extra damage from it, it's not as easy to abuse as something like the Frost Nova from the frozen orbs, the little orb spikes that come out at the end. You know, you can see that, whereas with mine, you can't really see it on the screen. But if you run a little bit, you will be able to see where the explosion happens. Now, what does this mean in terms of damage? Well, it means that the Freezing Arrow does some pretty significant density damage, but very poor single target damage. And I'm going to bring up a window on the screen for you guys to see, which covers all of the damage that this character does. And bink. Ooh, that is really big and really bright. Hold on, let me bring that down a little bit in size. There we go. All right, so what we're looking at is an on-hit damage of about 840 to 1424, and this is with our ice bow, right? So with our ice bow. We also have a explosion damage of 4,127 to 4,389, which is different than our sheet damage of 3,677 to 3,727. And why is that? The answer to that question lies in the fact that we have charms. So every single charm that we have in our inventory, these little 15 to 29 cold damage charms, the Raven Frost here, which has 15 to 45 cold damage, the charm right here, which has 4 to 11 cold damage, all of this, all of it gets taken and put it into the explosion as well as the on-hit damage, which means that these little charms, although they might not seem like a whole lot, actually do a hell of a lot more than what they state, because we're talking about, see, 4,360 to 4,389. Same thing with our on-hit damage. We got 1,382 to 1,424. So this is not only adding to our on-hit, it is also adding to our explosion and each additional explosion as well, which means that these get multiplied many, many, many times outward and do a hell of a lot more than just 15 to 29 damage. Now, as you can see from our average explosion damage of 4,127 to 4,389, we have an average explosion damage of 4,258. Our average on-hit damage of 840 plus 1,424 divided by 2 is 1,132. Now, we can get 5 successive hits with our on-hit, which means that we have a total of 1,132 times 5 and 4,258 times 5 for our 5 pierce. However, for our single target, assuming that we're hitting just one target, we have an average damage of about 5,390, which isn't too bad. 30 hits, or say 30 monsters with 5 hits, so only 5 hits within a pack, a big, thick, like cow pack of 30 monsters. We are looking at 5 explosions. 5 explosions are multiplied out, so we have each explosion is going to do about 21,290 damage because they're going to be hitting 5 explosions, and we're going to get 30 hits on these explosions, and we're going to end up with about 106,450 damage per big explosion pack, right? And that means that we're also going to add in our 5,660, which is our on-hit damage right here, times 5, because we're going to be hitting 5 times with our on-hit, which is going to give us about 112,110 damage per shot. And then we have about 2.77 shots per second, because I made sure that I hit that specific breakpoint, which means we're doing about 310,544 damage per second. And to put this into perspective, let's go down into River Flame real quick, see if we can find a nice thick juicy pack, and I'll show you kind of what this means in terms of actually like firing at a big thick pack of monsters. So let's get our brethren over here, get them all nice and grouped up, and we're gonna make sure we get all of our nice explosions. And this is on P8, by the way. These Stygian hags, or whatever they're called, I can't remember, grotesque worms, these guys are immune to cold. However, you'll notice that even though they are immune to cold, which you can tell if I take my Sunder Charm off, I can still effectively dish out some pretty serious damage by utilizing those explosions. This is, of course, in sequence with the negative res and all that other beautiful stuff. And it just makes for a very nice little popcorn kind of effect. Here's a nice big thick pack right here, so let's take this pack on, and I'm going to go ahead and fire my arrows in at optimal piercing. So we want to make sure we're getting as many pierces as we can. Your goal is to get 5 pierces or more. If you can get that 6th pierce off, that's also nice, but in general at least 5. And as you can see, the monsters die relatively quickly, down to the point where there's just 1 or 2 monsters, and that's where things get a little bit more interesting. So you have to kind of focus damage them out. And the way that Freezing Arrow works is the denser the pack is, the thicker the packs are, the more damage you do in general. And I'm pretty sure this is on P8. Let me just double check here. It is in fact on P8. Let me go grab the leg real quick, and I'm going to take you into the cow level, because that's another dense area, because I really want you to see just how nicely everything just pops. Or actually, you know what would be even a better place, I was thinking off the top of my head, is Act 2 Loot Go Lane Sewers, which is a really nice terror zone, by the way. And The packs in here are nice and tightly grouped. And it's almost one of like the most perfect areas for the freezing arrows on, because when you come in here, usually what happens is you turn a corner and the monsters are nice and neatly grouped up for you in advance. And of course, these are nice, beautiful champions. Another interesting thing about freezing arrow, which is definitely something you can take advantage of in zones like this, is you can take advantage of the wall damage. Wall damage is something that a lot of people don't know of. It's when you hit a wall, your arrows explode. See, they make a nice little explosion. So if you attack a monster near a wall, you will get a secondary explosion, that final explosion from when the arrow hits the wall, and it will do extra damage, basically 2 times the amount of damage that it normally would. And it's very, very effective. And as you can see, a lot of the times what ends up happening is the elite monster is the one that's left. You'll fire the arrows into the pack, and basically all the monsters will die except for the elite. And then usually you end up finishing the elite off. This is not really a good single target damage build. It's a very good density clear build. It works extremely good for high density, big thick monster packs, and not really so much for those ones that are all spread out all over the place. And as you can see, even in P8, if the monsters are nice and juicily, grouped up for you, it makes it very easy. This particular pack, as you can see, was nice and spread out, so a little bit harder to kill because they are obviously, not densely clustered. Even the monsters that are cold immune don't really last very long, which is quite beautiful. And when you have these monsters lined up all nice in a row like this, I mean, it just works out so nicely. You just line up your pierces. You make sure you're hitting as many pierces as you can, and then you freeze them. And the CC is absolutely incredible on this ability, and that's something else that we need to talk about. So not only does Freezing Arrow have amazing density powers, basically clearing those big, dense, thick packs, it also has the absolutely amazing effect of Frieza's Target, which allows you to just lock down massive groups of monsters. For instance, if I wanted to just simply fire a shot into a group and not even worry about it, I could just go like this, fire the shot in, and they're just frozen for several seconds. And I could continually freeze them over and over again until they die, and they really can't do much to stop me. And the explosive radius of the effect will hit everything within those 3.3 yards, and every single time an explosion happens, it gets even better. Another thing that you have to consider with the Frieza's Target effect is that with the Sunder, one of the things that we do now is we build negative resistance. So my character has a facet in her armor. She has 2 facets in the Crown of Ages, and she has the 20% on the ice, which means she's rocking a nice negative 35% to enemy cold resistance. What a lot of people don't know about cold damage and Frieza's duration and cold chill duration is that the lower the monster's resistance to cold, the longer the effect lasts. Which means that with my pretty massive negative 35% enemy cold resistance, I am sitting at a much longer freeze duration than would otherwise normally be obtained. Now, there are some downsides to Freezing Arrow. As I said earlier, it is a very poor single target ability. It does not do well versus single targets because it just doesn't really do a large amount of damage if there's not a large amount of monsters there to cause or trigger the explosions. Now you can utilize the wall trick, like I was talking about, to double the single target damage, but it's still only going to be 2 times, whereas in a nice thick pack it can be literally up to 6 times the amount of damage that it would normally be in a single target encounter. Another big downside of Freezing Arrow is its massive mana consumption issues. I have 372 mana right now, and if I just simply attack the wall right here, you will notice that my mana just chunks down absolutely ridiculously fast. And before too long, I am completely out and I can't do anything about it. Now, to counter this, I have a pretty large amount of mana steal. I have 7% on my amulet, I have 3% on my gloves, and I have another 6% on my ring, which gives me a grand total of 16% mana steal. And it's at this level that I'm finally able to maintain with about 16% mana steal. Now, the reason why it takes so much is because Freezing Arrow doesn't really have a physical damage component. Yes, it does physical damage, but how much does it do? If you take a look at my regular attack here, and if I drop some of these cold damage charms in my stash, you will see my physical damage component is a little bit, it's a little bit hard to give you my physical damage component actually, because I have the ice effect. Let me switch to the Harmony Bow, which is a little higher on the physical damage. It's not really going to work out. We're looking at about 335 to 737 physical damage. And I think I have to take off the Raven Frost, which I can't because it would remove the bow. Any elemental damage obviously does not factor in to the whole cold damage or mana steal. And as you can see, just by simply taking off the bow and putting it back on, I only have about, let's say, 700 physical damage, which means that my mana steal really doesn't have a whole lot to work off of because I really don't do very much physical damage at all with this setup. It's not made for that. And this is kind of a big problem because not only do you not mana steal, you also don't really lifesteal very much either. Now, for the majority of my journey up, I was actually utilizing a meditation merc because it made it a lot easier, and I was just basically a lot lazier to be able to keep firing my freezing arrow indefinitely. Now, eventually, I was able to curb that because, quite honestly, the meditation polearm is not really something that you want to be using if you can avoid it. So if I had another option, I definitely wanted to take the other option. And let me switch back to my freezing arrow. And that's what I did. I very slowly weaned myself away from the meditation polearm until I could use something else. Because inevitably, your goal on this particular build is to utilize something like either Plague, which is a very nice level 12 lower resistance when struck, or an Infinity, which would reduce the monster's cold resistance even further. Either one of these things would be absolutely devastating on this particular class, and it just makes a lot of sense to go with a higher DPS output build as opposed to just simply stacking on more mana regeneration so you can avoid having to chug potions on a regular basis. That's something that you will have to tackle when it comes to Freezing Arrow because it does have a massive 18.5 mana cost, and the higher level you get it, the more mana it's going to cost, and you are going to want to get it pretty high. As you can see, I have a very nice +2 bow and crossbows here. I'm also utilizing the +2 on the arcanes, the +1 on the Crown of Ages, the +2 on the amulet. I also have several bow and crossbow skillers to beef up my skills as much as I can. And of course, well, these are supposed to be +2. Why are they +3? These are +2. I edited these in wrong, I guess. +2 bow and crossbow skill gloves. That's okay, because it looks like I edited in the bow wrong, too, which is only +2 instead of +3, which is what it's supposed to be. So it actually offsets. That's actually kind of funny. I made a mistake here, and I made a mistake there, and they just kind of canceled each other out. So what do you do with all your extra points, though, when you build Freezing Arrow? That's a question, right? Well, you really don't need to put points into Ice Arrow, so Freezing Arrow is really just a 40-point investment. But you only really need 20 points in Cold Arrow and 20 points in Freezing Arrow. And you do also need a decent level of Pierce. Now, what level that is exactly is up to you, depending on how you have your build set up. But I would recommend getting as close to 100% as possible, either with your skill points or with equipment. If you're using Razor Tail or any of those other items like Wisdom, or you have a bow on that provides additional Pierce. Whatever it is that you're doing, try and get as close to 100% for Freezing Arrow as you can. Then you can drop your other points into other things. You don't really need critical strike because you're not a physical damage class. You don't really need penetrate because you're not a physical damage class. Now you could put points into penetrate, but it's up to you. Dodge, avoid, and evade are very nice to put points into. And in fact, I usually put 5 points into each one just to make my Amazon as tanky as possible. The Amazon, the Valkyrie, you can get basically about to like a level 17. What I'm getting at here is that when you build a Freezing Arrow build, you've got lots of points to do with whatever you want. You could put points into the elemental fire tree if you wanted to. You could throw some into the physical tree, although this really isn't a physical build. I do recommend at least getting guided arrow and strafe if you're going to go with a freezing arrow build. And, at that point, you can pretty much just stack things in the passive and magic tree. Maybe get yourself some inner sight or slow missiles, beef up your Valkyrie more, whatever it is that you're looking to do. It's really just kind of like open. And that's what's really amazing about the freezing arrow build is that because you only have to put 20 points in the cold arrow and 20 points in the freezing arrow, you can actually work it in to a lot of other builds. And freezing arrow doesn't necessarily have to be dishing out damage. The beautiful thing about freezing arrow is that despite the fact that it is used for a damage dealing ability, it also works insanely well just as crowd control. If you were for instance, a exploding arrows on, maybe you just wanted to add in a little freezing arrow just for the crowd control. Like for instance, right here, look at how well I can just completely lock down the crowds so that they can do basically nothing. Not even just killing them. We're not talking about the DPS output. Like I could literally just lock down entire crowds and stop them from being able to fight back. And this is something that you can add in to many different builds. Even if you're a physical Amazon, having the ability to spam a couple freezing arrows can be absolutely tremendous in terms of crowd control. Like, for instance, let's say you were in the cows and the cows are all coming for you. You get them nicely clustered, fire a couple freezing arrows in there, they all freeze, and then just start spamming your physical ability, whether it be strafe, multi-shot, or you're using guided arrow, or maybe you're using exploded arrow or immolation arrow, or even, honestly, if you're a Lightning Fury Amazon. I have known many Lightning Fury Amazons to double dip into the freezing arrow and have a bow on their swap so that they can utilize that for crowd control, abilities. I think I've gone over pretty much everything when it comes to this. I think the only things that I maybe could add on is the 2 bows that are best for freezing arrow builds. So if you are a pure freezing arrow build, you basically have 2 options. It is the ice bow and the Wizendraw bow. So the Wizendraw is a normal difficulty bow, but it has a massive negative 35% enemy cold resistance. And if you facet it, it has negative 40% enemy cold resistance, which is just absolutely insane. And if you take a look at my negative res now, I am sitting at a massive negative 55% with the Wizendraw bow. Now, while the Wizendraw bow will not give me increased damage versus the non-immunes, the Wizendraw bow will, however, give me a massive damage bump versus the monsters that are immune. So anytime I'm fighting a monster that is immune to my effects, like for instance, if I were to go to Crystalline Passage where there's tons of cold immunes, the Wizendraw bow will kill faster than the ice bow because it strips that cold immunity away much better than the ice bow does. And this is P8, by the way, against cold immunes. So these monsters are always cold immune. And as you can see, the Wizendraw bow handles them just fine. And it really is such a cheap bow too. You could probably pick up a 35% Wizendraw for like a Lem or a Pull. And the perfect 5.5 facet will obviously be a little bit more hard to come by, but it's definitely something that you're going to want to shove in there to make it even better as far as breaking those immunities and just ripping the resistances away from the monsters. For instance, let me swap to the ice bow real quick and take on another pack of snowdrifters. And as you can see, not quite as fast on the kill speed, but still there. because the negative resistance isn't a huge difference, and the plus positive damage on the ice bow is definitely a nice bonus as well. So it's kind of like a catch-22 in my eyes. Like, both of them are good choices, but the Wizen Draw is so much cheaper. I mean, you need a jaw and a low rune to make the ice bow, and you need not much to make the Wizen Draw. You need a Ral, a Soul, and a Perfect Emerald to upgrade it from Tier 1 to Tier 2. You need a Pull, a Lum, and a Perfect Emerald to upgrade it from Tier 2 to Tier 3. And then you need a Perfect Cold Facet, which is eminently cheaper than a Jaw or a Low Rune, especially both of them. I did end up using Silk Weaves for this build because the mana cost is just insane. And being able to maintain my mana is definitely something that I like. Here we go. We got some champion Snowdrifters here. Oh, here we go. Moongrin the Cold. As you can see, this is P8. And even these cold immunes in P8 are having issues dealing with the Wizen Draw bow. This is the Wizen Draw. You can see the green. The Wizen Draw is iconic because it has green. Never understood why it was green since it strips down cold immunity. You would have thought it would have been like, I don't know, like blue or maybe even red, like the anti-cold. You know, like it's a fire bow or something, and it reduces the monster's cold resistance. But it's green. I don't really know. Wizen Draw also has some nice alternative effects also, so when you run out of arrows, you can fire magic arrows out of this thing. They are 100% free. They're not really going to be the most amazing damage in the world, but it's free. The competition between the Wizen Draw and the Ice Bow is pretty stiff. There are a lot of reasons to go with Ice over Wizen Draw. The Holy Freeze Aura, which adds more cold damage and also slows down targets and adds additional CC. The ITD effect that's on the Ice Bow is also very, very nice. I mean, just in general, the Ice Bow has a lot going for it, including a massive 309% extra gold for monsters, which I found to be more than enough to constantly keep filling up my gold despite having to repair items on a regular basis. And then, of course, the Frost Nova on the Ice Bow is also very interesting, although not really high damage. But it does apply a very nice chilling effect to everything nearby, which is pretty cool. That chilling effect is a pretty long duration because the rather high level of the Frost Nova. But the damage on Frost Nova is like maybe like 100, 200. It's not even really much to talk about. I think that's pretty much everything when it comes to Freezing Arrow. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.